warm welcome back to Autism Unpacked. I'm your host, Rosie Gilmoss. Throughout this series, we're exploring the many aspects of autism by chatting with both experts and those who have first-hand experience. Whether you're a parent on this journey with your child or you're just curious, we're here to have the big conversations. Joining me today is Tom Malone Jr. Tom is a TV personality, probably best known for his appearances on the show Gogglebox. He's also a professional dancer whose talent has taken him all around the world. He's also autistic. Since his diagnosis at 28, Tom has openly shared his experience with his many social media followers, earning respect for his honesty and inspiring others to share their stories. Tom is actively involved in changing the stigma around autism, and in 2022 he was appointed as a celebrity advocate for the National Autistic Society. Thank you for coming on to talk to me today. One of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about was things about that diagnosis.
Yep.
So when you posted on social media, which was a lovely post, by the way.
Thank you.
One of the things I personally found really relatable is this idea of having felt a bit different. And it's kind of why I'm really a big advocate of diagnosis. I pushed for diagnosis for 2 of my 4 children.
Yep.
And I've been diagnosed myself because I think it gives you this sort of sense of acceptance and takes away that feeling of I don't know if you've had this kind of glass wall between you and the world and you
Yep.
don't quite belong.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk to you a little bit more about that and what it was like growing up without knowing who you were.
So it was one of those things where it almost felt like everything that everyone else found really easy, I just couldn't do, and I couldn't work out why they were so good at it and I wasn't, until I realized, obviously, with my diagnosis later on, that my brain isn't programmed to understand those things. And I remember being a kid, I remember actually having the thought of, what if I'm the only person in the world and everyone else is like a robot? And I remember, turns out it's more likely the other way around because I'm more logical than most people, but I remember thinking, like, what if I'm the only person that's this way and everyone else is something else? And I remember thinking that all the time when I was a kid, and like looking at other people, trying to work out how they react to things and if I would react the same way or if I should react the same way. And yeah, it was a bit of an eye-opening experience when I got my diagnosis, because like you said, it's a level of acceptance of, oh, I am different. And
this is why.
Yeah, and it's an understanding of it, and then understanding that, oh, it's okay that I struggle with those things, because like if you actually look at how my brain's programmed, I'm doing better than you might have thought. I'm doing better to cope with it than most people would. So,
and it's things like when you're a child, so many of the autistic traits and behaviours, you can get labelled as naughty, fussy, rude. How many times were you told to make eye contact, to hug people? All these kind of micro traumas that are being done to us, but not deliberately. There's no intent there.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering what your parents did, because I know you're close to your family, because they must have known that you found the world a little bit difficult. And how were they able to assist you? Because they wouldn't have known either. I mean, my parents haven't got a clue either, and they actually feel quite guilty about it, which they shouldn't. But I'm just wondering if they helped you out anyway.
Yeah, massively. And my grandparents as well. Because I used to have a thing about onions and stuff in my food. My grandma used to grate onions into food for me so that they were dissolving the food and stuff. Like my mum and dad. One thing that I'm always thankful for my mum and dad for is I had the same consequences for my actions as my brothers and sisters. Even though they knew I was a bit different, I never got any kind of leeway for stuff. And it wasn't that they didn't acknowledge that certain things might have been harder. It was more that when I become an adult in the real world, other people won't wait for me to disclose a diagnosis before they treat me accordingly.
Yeah.
So it was more that they were just preparing me for the fact that the world is like that.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that, because like I said, I've got autistic children.
Yep.
And whilst the rules are slightly different, because I'm coming at this from a point of awareness, I know, I got the paperwork, right?
Yeah.
So things like around meal times, to not make it a battlefield, I will cook 4 different types of pasta. But when it comes to the basic discipline and kind of foundations in my house, the rules are the rules.
Yep.
You know, you're not unkind, you're not rude.
Those
rules are, they are, it doesn't matter whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, those are base rules that you need to live by. And I think you're right in terms of the world is much more accommodating, but unless you wear a sunflower lanyard, nobody knows. And I'll be honest with you, I don't wear a sunflower lanyard, do you?
No. Not unless I'm going through an airport.
Yeah. so much of the work you're trying to do now is about changing that stigma, which I will come back to as well. I'm jumping topics a little bit. Because another thing I wanted to ask you is I now look back on my childhood and I think, oh God, that was really autistic. And I'm thinking, have you got any examples or anecdotes that you could tell us about when you were a child?
Yeah, loads. There was one time that, because my sister was dancing before I was, and they used to obviously put mousse in their hair and stuff at competitions, and my auntie actually came over and gave me a tub of chocolate mousse, and in my head, mousse goes in your hair. So I rubbed
Oh,
chocolate mousse all in my hair. My mum came over and said, "What you doing?" I said, "It's mousse." So I put it in my hair because that's what the girls do. Literally, just took it literally. Mousse must be hair. There was times that a girl asked me about her makeup, and I said it looked weird. In my head, I'm thinking weird just
yeah.
means not usual. I wasn't applying the connotations other people do to it. So then she was upset. Her mum was saying to my mum as if Thomas just said this to this girl, and I'm wondering what I've done wrong. And obviously now I'm older, I can apply the context and work it out for myself. But yeah, as a kid, everything was literal. None of my food could touch.
Oh,
If I
yes.
was like reading or something, no one could speak to me because I was just zoned out in my
Yeah.
own little world. I'd also have, like, a lot of people thought I had a really bad temper when I was a kid, but now as I'm older, I'm realizing it was sensory overload, or because I'd worked out my way of having to do something and I wasn't able to do it that way and I didn't know how to deal with it. And yeah, it's weird looking back at it. I see so much of it in my childhood, but I also see so much of it in older members
Oh,
of my
God,
family.
yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why my parents were so good growing up. Like, because yeah, I was late diagnosed, probably because they looked at it as a family trait rather
Hmm.
than like autistic traits, which isn't their fault because there was less, like 30 years ago when I was a kid, there was less like knowledge about it around.
Yeah, you had to be pretty
Yeah.
profoundly autistic to get a diagnosis back
But
then.
I think at the same time, because there was older family members that were the same way, it was kind of just accepted that that was who I
Yeah.
was, and they just treated me normal and found ways around it that might normally help older family members that they found helped me as well. So I can't credit my mum and dad enough, like especially for not knowing. They were so good with me growing up.
Yeah, this is how I feel about my parents.
Yeah.
Is they knew there was something,
Yeah.
but they didn't know what, so they tried everything, you know.
Yeah.
And for me, it presented more so in my sort of as I hit puberty,
Mm.
basically the hormones, and I suffered with eating disorders and. You know behavior. You know, I
Yeah.
was volatile. I was, you know, the stained glass had to be replaced in my front door several times. Because, but looking back now, I felt such a huge amount of guilt for the behaviours. Whereas now
Yeah.
I understand that I was in overwhelm or burnout. That's not who I am. That's just I had literally reached my saturation level. So, Tom, what was it then that prompted you to go about getting a diagnosis for yourself?
Um, so I'd got to an age where people would always make comments and mention being autistic and stuff. And my mum actually did take me to the doctors when I was a kid, and they just said that I was ignorant because
Oh,
they tested my hearing, I guess, and my hearing was fine. So they thought I just wasn't listening to people because I was ignorant. So yeah, I was diagnosed as ignorant instead.
nice.
And then as an adult, it never really, to me, I always had this kind of idea of I've got this far, I'll be okay. A label won't really
Hmm.
change anything. How wrong I was, but yeah, that was my mindset kind of. And then my nephew got diagnosed. One of them, then another, and the second one, he was actually living with my mum and dad at the time. And when his school suspected him of having autism, it was all the same little things that I used to do when I was little. And at that point, I thought I should get tested. So I went, I got um my assessment, and it was more from a place of if I am, it might not necessarily change the rest of my life that much, but I can then be a person he can relate to, especially because I've grown up not being your stereotypical
Hmm.
sort of autistic person that they
Yeah.
like to put in a box. So I've done all these things that you wouldn't necessarily equate to someone with autism or someone that's autistic. So for me, it was a case of if you can look at me and see that you can achieve things outside of that box and you don't have to stick in the box that people put you in, and also you've got an older family member that you can go to when you're feeling a type of way that might understand where you're coming from, then I kind of owe it to him to get my diagnosis too and
Making me a bit
be that
emotional, that
person.
Tom. That's really sweet. Interestingly, my son was diagnosed at 5, and it was through supporting him, really. I created like a youth club for autistic children, and you chat away to other women who've got
Mm.
neurodivergent children, and you all start to look at each other and think, hang on a minute. And it was a friend that said to me, I think you might have ADHD. And I wouldn't speak to her for about 2 weeks. So I was like, don't be ridiculous. Don't be ridiculous. Turns out I do. It's seeing yourself kind of reflected back in a younger person,
Yep.
and you start to think, oh gosh, that was me. That was me. And for me, it's been about helping to kind of, I've got my younger daughter has now been diagnosed as well. And it's about that sense of not being alone. You know, we're
Yep.
in this together. And we read some books together, about autism and ADHD. And it just, they like to see themselves represented.
Yep.
They like that I understand. It was getting Hector's diagnosis. Just I was just a better mum because I was so much more compassionate and
Yep.
patient, and I understood that things like not being able to put your shoes on the first time I ask is not you just being a defiant little toad. There's more to it than that. So you said you feel that the diagnosis is sort of giving you that almost that knowledge and that clarity about who you were as a child. And
Yep.
I was much like you. Why would you label? And I read in a I read in a book once that a label is a care instruction. So
Mm.
it tells you how a child needs to be supported and cared for. And I think when you reframe it like that, you think, why wouldn't you? Why
Yep.
wouldn't you try and understand? How did your family react when you got diagnosis? Were they like, yeah, we know?
Yeah, my mum laughed down the phone at me. I was like,
She-
when I got the official confirmation, I got quite emotional because I was like looking back at stuff or whatever, and I rang my mum and she just laughed and was like, "Yeah, of course you are."
yeah,
She was like, "We've been telling you this for so
yeah,
long, like
yeah,
this is just official." And I think it was important in terms of like grounding, in terms of they just treated me the same as they always had, so it didn't
yeah,
really affect my family too much in that sense. Um, Obviously they're more aware of stuff, but in terms of how they interacted with me, it was exactly the same. I'm still the same person that
yeah.
I've always been. I just know why I'm certain ways.
I think it almost helped my parents to a certain extent because
Mm.
they were really great parents. I had no deprivation, no trauma. I was, a very happy child. And then the wheels sort of fell off. And I
Mm.
think nobody's ever really been able to understand why. And I was labelled with depression and put on antidepressants and all these sort of things that women as well. I mean, particularly, it's not recognised. And I almost went through a period of grief when I got my diagnosis.
Mm.
And that's a big word because but I do mean grief because I think I grieved all those missed opportunities, all those times that I had behaved really, really recklessly or impulsively because I was seeking that dopamine, that
Yep.
affirmation, and all the times that I'd been really, really unkind to myself. My mantra in my head, I won't say the word, but it's something Rosie, God's sake, Rosie.
Mm.
And that is the mantra that had been in my head all my life. And why am I like this? Why am I like this? And now I'm able to take a little bit of a step back and say, you're like this because you've got two neurological conditions that make life a bit harder.
Yeah.
Give yourself a break. And do you think that you've been able to apply that to yourself as well? That bit of extra kindness?
Yeah, definitely kindness. I definitely went through a bit of a roller coaster of phases after
Mm,
my diagnosis. I went for a long point where I was kind of like, oh, I'm like this because I'm autistic. So how do I separate my personality from autism?
yeah.
And then I went through a phase where I kind of accepted that, oh no, I am that way because I'm autistic and I can't separate them. That's just the way I process information,
Hmm.
which like my whole personality is shaped because I'm autistic. And then I went through a phase of, okay, well then how do I separate my personality from my mask and
I
how
was
I
going to say
mask
about
as
the mask.
yeah.
Yeah.
And at that point I came to the conclusion after that and the acceptance of everyone is shaped by our interactions with other people and how we learn and what we take from other people and like our experiences. And as much as I'm not solely the mask of when I'm masking or whatever, as I chip away at that, I find that it's how I've learnt to deal with situations, and
Hmm.
that's okay as well. That's my kind of safety blanket almost.
And I think there is, to a certain extent, there's sort of positive masking
Yep.
because if you're in a very noisy, overstimulating environment, you can't always grab a weighted blanket and have a little rest under the corner, can
Yeah.
you? So things like I use those ear loops
Yeah.
sometimes about all my headphones
Yeah.
with the noise cancellation. So masking enables you to kind of adapt as well to fit your environment, which we kind of
100%.
have to do. And you talked briefly about dancing and your sister being a
Yeah.
dancer. Was that what sort of prompted you to get into dance? I'm going off on a tangent here
Yeah.
because there's a relevance coming, I promise.
No, that's fine. In a weird way, I kind of see like music and stuff. A lot of people talk about noise with autism, but I like to find the patterns within
Hmm.
music and this kind of thing. So I think it kind of fits almost as like a stim.
Yeah.
So as a child, I used to go to my grandma and granddad's and sit on my granddad's knee, and he would play me music, and he had so much music of all different genres, and that was like my introduction to music.
On a record player?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as I got older, my sister wanted to dance. So my mum and dad found like a tap and ballet school kind of thing that was in like a local primary school
Yeah.
near where he was on the weekend. So she went to that, and I'm only 2 years younger than her, so I got dragged along as well. But just to sit with my mum at the
Hmm.
back while my sister was doing it, I heard the music and I just stood up and started joining in. And
And
yeah,
how old would you have been?
6.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a long time ago.
And I'm now thinking you've got a young boy who's got undiagnosed autism
Yep.
and likes to dance. How was that at school for you?
Um, I think so. Something that a lot of people don't talk about as much with autism is this sense of morality and a sense of justice that we have. I
Hmm.
think because we see things in a more like black and white kind of way a lot of the time. I think it's very much if something's wrong, that's wrong. If it's right, it's right. And yes, there's times where the context will change that, but it's still very much wrong and right.
Hmm.
So for me, as a boy that liked to dance, I would go to school, and if someone said something, I'd end up getting in trouble for handling it in the wrong way a lot of the time. But um, yeah, I think after I had gotten a couple of fights and stuff over it, people kind of realized that I'm just the same as any other boy. I just like to dance, and I'm a bit socially awkward.
Best of us are. I sadly can't dance, but my daughter, who's autistic, she dances, and she's been going since she was about 2.5. I mean, it mainly consisted of her running around the school hall,
Yep.
and now she dances competitively. And I don't come from the dance world, but I can see that giving an autistic child, an interest outside of school, because we
Yep.
know that school can be challenging, whether and I don't know about you, but in my experience, a lot of autistic children aren't so keen on the team sports.
Mm.
So something like dance, which you can do quite individually, or
Yep.
you can do as part of a team, and there's the discipline, and like you say, the rhythm, finding the music, and I don't know whether she'll go on to be a professional dancer. I wouldn't like to say because she might listen one day, but it's certainly helped her managing her emotions, and it's just been a really useful tool. I know that dance has had an amazing impact on your life. You
Yeah.
get to travel around the
Huge.
world dancing,
Yeah.
don't you? What sort of dance do you do now?
So I've trained in pretty much everything. Tap, ballet, contemporary, um, locking, popping, breaking, house,
What's your favourite?
everything. Uh, it's a toss up between like choreography, like stylized choreography, and breaking, definitely, for two different reasons. I feel like breaking really ignites like the competitive spirit that I
And this
have.
is what the old people would call breakdancing, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So breaking really ignites that competitive spirit because it's like a question and answer, like battle situation.
Yes.
So I love that. But then I think the reason I've always loved the choreography side of things and is it's a lot more when I was growing up, if I struggled to convey an emotion because I wasn't the best at communicating that kind of stuff, I could always let that out through that side of dance. And that was my way of like almost venting that those emotions that I'd struggle to communicate.
Yeah, I write. I used to write my mum notes and
Okay.
things like that, and it's something I do with my kids now as well. Because sometimes if you do struggle with communication, it's finding another way to let people know, and that is
Yep.
a lot of the, I suppose, the sort of hidden side of autism is a lot of what we're processing will go on beneath the surface.
Yep.
So you can look very calm and serene, but I was thinking of like the swan that's paddling furiously under the water. Would you say then that your neurodiversity has perhaps helped you in your career because of that kind of immense hyper focus and special interest that you will have had around dance?
Yeah, 100%. In multiple different ways as well, not just within like one side of the career, which is the creative side and the traveling, competing, performing. Of course, when you're honing your skills, being able to hyper focus on something that you're passionate about is like a bit of a superpower in a way.
Hmm.
Like that was amazing for me, but as well outside of that, in terms of the social currency it gave me,
Yeah.
like when I was at school, like even prior to when my career was like going from strength to strength, when I was at school, like having that social currency of knowing that, yeah, I might be a bit awkward in these situations. I might not understand these social cues. I might struggle when I can't do something in my particular way that I'm comfortable with. But I never felt any sort of lesser within my self worth because I knew that in the thing that I'm passionate about, I excel at. And I know that I'm really good at something that I care about, like more than anything in the world. And no matter what you can say about how I might be awkward, this thing that I care the most about, I'm good at. So it's never going to depreciate my value in my mind because I'm good at the thing I care about. And I think that was something that, as a life skill, is probably the biggest thing that dancers gave me aside from everything else. Like,
And as you're speaking, I'm thinking it's probably one of the biggest gifts your parents gave you
mm,
because I'm going to say allow, but that's probably not the right word, but to encourage a boy to go into dance is still something that not all parents would actively encourage, and particularly not 20 odd years ago.
yep,
But to allow you to explore your craft and your hyper focus, they've enabled you to form a career out of it.
yep,
And I suppose there's a message there for parents who are listening whose children might be into something and you're thinking, well, that's not going to make you a career, is it?
yeah,
And you never know. I was talking off camera earlier about a friend of a friend whose son sells Lego. You know, that was his
okay,
special interest. He buys it secondhand, sells, and he's making an absolute fortune. So it's fun. It's all about finding, and because that word's superpower can feel, sometimes it can feel a bit offensive, can't it, when you're in
yeah.
full burnout lying staring at a wall. Where's my
There's
superpower?
definitely a time and place for
Yeah, but
it.
in situations like that, to be as good as you are in any field, you have to be dedicated and you have to
Mm.
love it.
Yeah, it's definitely there's a lot of time and effort that goes into it, and being able to kind of knuckle down on one thing, and the stuff that other people might find the boring drills that they have to do and
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. I can get really meticulous with, okay, no, I need to fix this really little thing and then drill it 10 more times,
It's
and
almost like sensory circuits. You're
yeah,
almost going through your sensory circuits.
and you're
Yeah,
making these tiny little tweaks that over time make a huge difference, and where everyone else might find it boring, I find it like a little puzzle that I have to
I'm like that with
unlock and
words.
refine. Yeah.
I will, if I'm writing something and it'll go round and round in my head, and then it'll almost line up like music, and then I know I've got it right.
Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it? The old artistic brain.
Yep.
You have been in the media spotlights, and as I mentioned before, you've got a vast social media following. I need your advice. I can't seem to grow mine. And I'm just wondering how that impacted on you, because sometimes as a neurodivergent, you just want to hide, don't
Yep.
you? And I'm wondering how you do that when you're under the spotlight or when you've got to go and perform in shows and on TV.
Performing in shows and stuff is a little bit different for me. I kind of disassociate from it.
Yeah.
I feel like when I'm on stage, I'm there for a purpose, and it's a purpose that I've always wanted and that I've worked hard for.
Do you
So
remember it? When you get off the stage, can you remember what you've done?
a lot of it,
Oh, you
yeah,
can.
yeah.
I'm interested because I will come out of an interview and my brain will just lose everything.
There's parts of it that I blank out of
Yeah,
when you get into like kind of like the
the
flow
zone.
state, or yeah, however people might refer to it. But yeah, I think I kind of disassociate from that. It doesn't feel like when someone's singing happy birthday to me in a room, I can't stand it. I don't need
Yes.
all eyes on me while you're expecting me to react a certain way,
Hmm.
and I don't always react the way that people expect me to react.
I sang happy birthday to myself once. They were bringing out a cake. I got so awkward that I started to sing happy birthday as the cake came out. It was for me. Uh, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, it's the worst feeling in the world. And then when I'm on stage, because I'm there for a reason, it's like I've put myself here,
Hmm.
and I'm here doing a skill that it's again, dance being my safety blanket. It's a
Yeah.
skill that I've put myself there for a reason. When it comes to social media, at first it was a little bit uncomfortable. And then I kind of took it as a bit of a responsibility. When I was young, there wasn't these people on social media that were autistic, and there wasn't that representation. And more so, even even less, there was representation of people that weren't stereotypically
Yeah.
autistic. There was
It's like
Rain
the Big
Man.
Bang Theory,
Yeah.
basically, was how autistic people were represented.
Big Bang Theory, Rain Man, like this is
Yeah.
how people thought every autistic person was. So I kind of saw it as more so I have an opportunity to show people that yeah, I'm a normal person. I do this like dance stuff that you all think is cool. I used to box, like I do a bunch of stuff that people would consider cool, but I also have really awkward moments. I'm also like a bit of a nerd when it comes to reading books that have dragons and elves in and stuff like that. Like I'm I'm not trying to sugarcoat it and be like, be autistic, you can be amazing like at these things and stuff. Like there's also downsides to it as well.
Mhm.
And I think being able to be honest about it from a real person's perspective on social media is something that we didn't have back then that
No.
is needed. So I kind of see it as a responsibility that I could be that for a
Yeah.
next generation of boys that might not relate to the Big Bang Theory and Rain Man, but they might see me and go, I kind of see like where he's coming from and what he struggles with. I like the same things as him, and I kind of fit the same sort of
Yeah.
demographic.
I really like seeing at the moment is there's a lot more talk about successful people who are
Yep.
neurodivergent. And it's one of the things that I've seen in my kids. They love to be able to aspire to somebody else who's got the same condition as them. I mean, my son did do a project on Elon Musk, which is a questionable role model, but he was fascinated. Teslas were a special interest at the time. So
Yeah.
he was then able to knuckle down and do a presentation on something that he was interested in. I feel a similar way because I feel that by being talking openly about my diagnosis, because it you get that you don't look autistic,
Yeah.
and it's such people think they're being nice when they say that to you, but it's such a derogatory thing to both myself and to the rest of the autistic community as well. Because what
Yeah.
does autistic look like? We don't. Well, sometimes we wear a lanyard actually, but that's something I always feel we're a bit branded when we have to wear
Yeah.
a lanyard. It's like I don't want to have to wear my brand to prove
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a bit of a strange one. Like you're expecting me to behave a certain way based on your stigmas
Hmm.
and not who I am as a person, and that it ends up being you're almost saying that you expect to see the autism first before you see me
Hmm.
as a person. It's a little bit dehumanizing,
Yeah.
and I think that's what I struggle with, and it's part of why I do what I do so much on social media is because I want people to see me as a person first, and I happen to be autistic.
Yeah.
Like I can do
Yeah.
all these things, and that's great. Oh, and I happen to be autistic.
Yeah.
Like I don't need to look at me and go autistic, and this is the person behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not it doesn't define who you are. It impacts on a huge amount of who you are,
Yep,
but we're still individual.
100%. I say to people all the time, like it doesn't define who I am, but it's a massive part of who I am.
Yeah.
Like everything, like it's massively shaped who I am. Basically, like I process things in a way because my brain is autistic,
Hmm.
and I can't separate myself from that. But I'm also a person first.
So how do you manage things like workloads and overwhelm? And if you've got a really busy schedule, how do you keep your because I'm making an assumption that you struggle with mental health because I know that so many autistic people
Mm,
do, and I don't mean necessarily to a debilitating degree, but it often will have an impact just because of
yep.
burnout and exhaustion. It's hard.
So I myself have never struggled with my mental
Mm.
health, which I'm grateful for. But I know a lot of people that have. I think a big part of it for me was that I've had something to work towards my whole life.
Yeah,
So I've never struggled with my self-worth like I was talking about before. But also I've had a really good support network. I've had a family that even though I wasn't diagnosed, they knew that I dealt with things a little bit differently and they accommodated that, but also taught me to navigate the real world. So I think I've been very, very lucky and very blessed with my lot in life in terms of finding a passion when I was young, having family that supported that, having family that supported me as who I am. Um, but I also see a lot of people that don't have those support networks,
yeah,
and I see it gradually start to chip away at people. And I think, especially being people that, for the most part, struggle to communicate a lot about how we're feeling, and we like to try and deal with it ourselves a lot.
mm,
Obviously, as a generalization, but I see it with a lot of autistic people. I think we're we're kind of in a tough spot where because we don't speak about it, it can build up with people. And I think it's important to get autistic people used to speaking, even if it's, like a campaign to get more therapists that are specially trained in dealing with neurodivergent people. Because it's not just autistic people, it's people neurodiverse in many different ways. And I think there needs to be more therapists that are trained specifically in dealing with neurodivergent people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, because the standard talk therapy can actually be quite damaging
Yeah.
to neurodivergent people. This is the subject for a whole other podcast, obviously. But what I'm hearing from you, and I'm thinking really of our listeners, many of whom will have neurodivergent children, they might be diagnosed, they might be thinking they need a diagnosis. But I guess what you're saying is that these accommodations that can be made before you have that piece of paper, because Lord knows we know the waiting lists are enormous at the moment. So your child could potentially go through the whole of primary school with you suspecting they're neurodivergent but not having the paperwork. So it kind of then becomes down to the parent to make some accommodations.
Yep.
And I guess it's those little things, isn't it? It's picking your battles. It's using a tone that isn't going to ignite the situation,
Yep.
and just and helping them explore things that calm them. And I personally was really kind of wary of gaming. It's very demonized, and my boys love to game, of course they do. And I spoke to a guy who runs a therapy service where the children communicate with the key workers through gaming, and that really changed my perception of that, because often with autistic children you might be taking away the gaming as a consequence, but actually what you're doing is it'd be like taking your dance lessons away.
Yep.
So Tom, if you were able to go back and speak to your younger self, what do you think you might say to him? What bits of wisdom and advice would you impart now you're old and wise?
There's definitely a few times that I'd tell him not to say that thing that you said, because it still keeps him up at night 20 years later.
I've got those.
But yeah, just to like keep pushing at the things he enjoys. And I can't really say there's too much I'd change, because it's shaped who I am now. And I'm I'm quite proud of who I am now. I'm still always learning, I'm still always trying to better myself, but I don't think there's too much that I would change. I would just make sure he knows that there's other people like you out there, and you're not the
only
one person that's struggling. Everyone, like, even the people that you think can deal with all these things that you can't, they struggle with other things, and everyone's struggling in their own unique ways. And part of life is just trying to
silent struggle.
No, it's just being accepting of those people's and what their struggles are, because you never know what people are dealing with.
Have you heard, it's an Instagram meme, I think, and it says, you go through your whole life thinking you're a terrible horse, and then you find out you're a zebra. And I actually have a zebra tattoo because I really like that as a sort of metaphor for life.
Yeah.
Now, I mentioned earlier about your role as an ambassador for the National Autistic Society. Tell me a little bit about that. How did you get involved with them?
So the first time I heard about them was when I had my assessment. I got diagnosed, and they sent me a bunch of resources that was different charities and different like leaflets of people that can help, and therapy options and stuff. And that's the first time I heard of the National Autistic Society, and then looked into them, saw what they were doing on Instagram and stuff. And I think the work they're doing around making not just awareness around autism, but acceptance, and pushing positive role models for autistic children, also autistic adults. They're also trying to improve the stigma and stereotypes around like women with autism, because even now they're incredibly represented. But yeah, it's it's just amazing the work they're doing, and I think it's definitely needed. It's stuff. The fact that I hadn't heard of them before, I was like, anything I can do to make sure that more people see it that might not already be autistic or have autistic children, family members, etc. I thought I need to make sure that other people see this.
Yeah, because as often when you go through a diagnosis yourself, you find out about all these things that you didn't know existed.
Yeah.
And you think, if I'd known about that before, I could have done such and such, or I could have used this. So what do you think the future holds now? What are your plans? What's coming up?
I want to make the world a place where you don't. It's built for autistic people as well. Basically, I want it to be a world where we're just taken into consideration.
Yeah.
There's a consideration for autistic people. It's not like an additional.
Yeah.
Like, for example, credit to them, Selfridges every week now, they have a day where in the daytime they don't play any music. so that autistic people can come and shop in a sensory safe place. And I think just more stuff like that, where the world kind of accepts autistic people exist, and we can just make it a nicer place for them to
They dim the
inhabit.
lights as well sometimes, don't they, in
Yeah.
supermarkets? Because it's not so much the noise for me, it's the lights. I hate
Yeah.
supermarkets. And taking an autistic child to a supermarket is obviously the massive sensory overwhelm. Well, Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you for the work that you're doing to raise awareness over such an important issue. And thank you for coming to talk to me.
Thank you for having me.
And if anybody out there has got any questions, you can visit optionsautism.co.uk. You can go to the National Autistic Society and give us a follow on social media, because you can help us raise awareness that way. Thank you for listening.